Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Charlene Aaron. President Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron say they will not be cowed by the Islamic militant group known as ISIS. The two are meeting with other world leaders at a NATO summit in Wales today, and the rise of ISIS in both Iraq and Syria is expected to dominate many discussions. Heather Sells has more.
As world leaders meet for the NATO summit officially to discuss Ukraine and Afghanistan, the rising threat of ISIS is looming large. British Prime Minister David Cameron showed how seriously he takes that threat, telling the BBC that he's not ruling out any military action against ISIS. And he says defeating the Islamic State won't be easy.
We have to take a long-term, tough, intelligent, patient view of this. We're going to have to squeeze it out of existence. It's going to take time.
Here at home, leaders on both sides of the aisle are signaling their willingness to work with the president on what is considered a major threat both abroad and at home. But they want the president to come up with a plan of action.
I hope the president will come up with a plan and submit it to Congress next week. And I think there's highly likely that we're going to be interested in supporting him. He needs to remind everybody that this is not just some Middle Eastern dispute here. These are people who want to kill us here at home.
We'll either fight them now or we'll fight them later, because they're not going to stop.
The White House has not ruled out airstrikes against ISIS in Syria, and Cameron has said that he's interested in joining a nearly month-long U.S. airstrike campaign in Iraq. Both Cameron and Obama appear to suggest that NATO should play a role in containing ISIS, but more specifics are not yet clear. What is clear is a heightened sense of urgency among world leaders and a belief that a united front is needed. In the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates has called for a coordinated international effort. It's also clear that ISIS is growing stronger in its quest to create a caliphate territory in the Mideast and systematically kill any who resist. President Obama has said that ISIS will pay the price for the deaths of American journalists James Foley and Steven Sotloff. Family and friends remembered Sotloff last night at a vigil in Florida.
He was no war junkie. He merely wanted to give voice to those who had none.
It's now become well known that the 31-year-old freelancer was an Israeli citizen, but that Israel kept his Jewish faith and citizenship a secret out of concern for his safety. The U.S. is analyzing the video of Sotloff's death for clues to find his killers and other U.S. and Western hostages. They're honing in on the Syrian city of Raqqa, where the U.S. believes ISIS killed both Foley and Sotloff. The U.S. and other world leaders are also working to identify citizens from their own countries that ISIS may have lured in to fight and then return home to launch attacks. Heather Sells, CBN News.
The other major issue at the NATO summit is protecting Eastern Europe. Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are concerned about Russia's incursion in Ukraine. Those countries were dominated by the former Soviet Union throughout much of the 20th century. Now they want NATO to put permanent bases with troops on their land to guard against further Russian aggression. The U.S. and Western European nations reject that plan. They cite a previous NATO agreement with Russia not to put substantial combat forces in Central and Eastern Europe. They're working on a plan to form a rapid reaction force to counter any Russian moves against NATO members in the region. A federal judge in Louisiana has upheld the state's marriage amendment, saying that states have the right to define marriage. It's the first federal court victory for traditional marriage in more than a year. In his ruling, U.S. District Judge Martin Feldman said same-sex marriage advocates failed to prove that the amendment violates equal protection or due process provisions in the Constitution. The amendment upholds marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Louisiana voters adopted it by a statewide vote of 78% back in 2004. And Kelly Fiordick is with the Alliance Defending Freedom. She joins us now from our D.C. bureau. Kelly, this is the first federal court victory for traditional marriage in over a year. How big a deal is it for traditional marriage supporters?
This is a great decision because a federal court has actually agreed with what the U.S. Supreme Court has already said about marriage, that it's the state's rights, it's the states have the authority to affirm marriage as one man and one woman. So this decision is consistent with what the U.S. Supreme Court has already said, and this is a true victory for the people of Louisiana who went to the ballot box and affirmed marriage as the union of one man and one woman.
Why did this judge in Louisiana uphold Louisiana's marriage amendment when so many other federal judges have not?
Well, he actually interpreted Windsor consistently with what the U.S. Supreme Court has said, that it is within the state's authority to define marriage, that's their freedom, that the people have the constitutional right to vote and to discuss issues as important and as impactful on society as marriage. So this is a great decision because this judge agreed with what the Supreme Court has already said about marriage.
Now, is it possible that other federal judges will take note of this case and be encouraged to rule in a similar fashion?
Well, that would be a wonderful thing, because this is consistent with the U.S. Constitution. This is consistent with the state constitutions. The Constitution allows the people to go to the ballot box and to affirm what marriage is.
Now, ultimately, where is this debate headed? Do you still see the Supreme Court deciding it in the next couple of years?
Absolutely. There are currently 3 cases that are pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, and we will likely know this fall which case or cases the Supreme Court will take, and we will likely get a decision on it as early as next June. And if the Supreme Court is consistent with what it's already said about marriage, it will agree with this federal court decision and affirm the people's authority, the people's right to affirm marriage as one man and one woman.
All right, Kelly Fedoruk, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Global health officials are warning the window for bringing Ebola under control is closing fast. The World Health Organization reports nearly 2,000 people have died from the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, surpassing all previous outbreaks combined. New estimates indicate it could take more than $600 million to control the epidemic. Meanwhile, a third American missionary is infected with Ebola. All 3 contracted the virus at the same hospital in Liberia. Lori Johnson tells us about this latest victim. She also sat down with one of the survivors, who's now speaking out about her brush with death.
51-year-old Dr. Rick Sacra was working for SIM, treating obstetrics patients, not Ebola victims, when he tested positive for the virus. SIM is headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. They operate Christian hospitals around the world, including the West African nation of Liberia, an area hardest hit by the Ebola outbreak. Despite that danger, Dr. Sacra put himself in harm's way after he learned his 2 co-workers, Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Wrightbull, contracted Ebola and therefore left a void in the hospital.
Rick and his family are currently living in the Boston area in the U.S. Rick travels back and forth to Liberia, and he volunteered just a month ago when Dr. Brantley and Nancy were tested positive to Ebola. Rick called and said, "I'm ready to go."
Dr. Sacra is being treated in Liberia and is said to be in good spirits and talking on the phone to his family in Boston. Right now, there are no plans to bring him back to the United States for treatment. There are also no plans to give him the experimental drug ZMapp, because there is reportedly none left. However, ZMapp was given to Nancy Wrightbull, who for the first time spoke publicly since recovering from Ebola.
The question is usually asked, what do you think saved you? Was it the ZMapp drug? Was it the supportive care? Was it the Liberian and our U.S. health, our U.S. medical people? Was it those doctors and nurses that helped to save you? Or was it your faith? And my answer to that question is all of the above.
In a one-on-one interview, Wrightbull said while she knew the odds were against her survival, she felt the calming presence of God.
Peace that he gives in times of really difficult situations is a peace that we can't even explain. And it's a peace that just is overcoming, and it's a peace that says it's going to be okay. Whether I live or whether I die,
And while she's grateful to be alive, she's grieved that back in Liberia, the Ebola outbreak is getting worse. Although Ebola can largely be prevented by keeping your hands clean, many West Africans don't know this and don't even have soap. That's where Operation Blessing comes in. By partnering with churches, they're handing out literature about the importance of hygiene. And they're providing liquid chlorine for disinfecting hands.
The real reason why it's spreading so much is people really haven't been educated enough to know about the dangers, especially in the remote parts of the country.
Operation Blessing is also donating supplies to treat Ebola patients and giving hospitals sterile equipment. So half a world away, Christians are on the ground in West Africa, risking their lives in order to save the lives of others. Lori Johnson, CBN News, Charlotte, North Carolina.
The U.S. Department of Justice is planning a wide-ranging investigation into the Ferguson Police Department. The probe comes after the shooting last month of Michael Brown, an unarmed black man, by a white police officer in the St. Louis suburb. The investigation will look at the practices in the past few years of the police department, including patterns of stops, arrests, and use of force, as well as the training the officers receive. The inquiry is separate from an ongoing civil rights investigation of Brown's shooting. Coming up, this Iranian pastor is spending 6 years in prison simply for practicing his faith. This story when we come back. The terrorist group al-Qaeda announced it has expanded into India. 3 Indian states with high Muslim populations are on alert after al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri made the claim in a new video this week. Zawahiri said the group will bring Islamic law to the subcontinent and, quote, wage jihad against its enemies. Analysts say Zawahiri's message might be directed more at fellow jihadists trying to prove al-Qaeda is still relevant after being overshadowed by the successes of the ISIS group in Iraq and Syria. Pope Francis is pledging his support for persecuted Christians in Iraq. On Wednesday, he said Iraq's Christians are, quote, heart of the church and the world's Catholics are proud of them. He also said the Catholic Church is like a mother that will defend her defenseless and persecuted children. His comments were translated into Arabic. ISIS militants have driven tens of thousands of Christians from their homes and towns in northern Iraq. The Pope has also said the international community is justified in using force to stop the ISIS army. Iranian Christian pastor Farshid Fatih is spending his 35th birthday in prison. He was arrested in December of 2010 simply for faith in Christ, and later was sentenced to 6 years in prison. David Yengnazar is with Elam Ministries, a group that supports the persecuted church in Iran. Recently, CBN's George Thomas spoke with David about Pastor Farshid's situation.
You got news recently that that Pastor Farshid was moved to one of the most brutal prisons in Iran. Quickly tell us the update on that.
In August, he was moved from Evin prison, where he's been all that time, to another prison, which is actually for where common criminals are held. And so his situation has become much more dangerous, and he's in a more difficult situation than he was before.
Why was he arrested and put in prison in the first place?
Basically, the government didn't want him to continue his Christian ministry, and so has arrested him. They actually said and charged him with activities against the government. They put a political slant on it, but really he has absolutely no political agenda whatsoever. He's simply a man who knows Jesus, who loves the Lord, and who wants to serve him.
And to my understanding, Christians are allowed to practice their faith in Iran, and in fact, it's against international law to imprison someone just because of their faith. Is that correct?
Well, actually, the Iranian constitution supposedly gives freedom to Iranian Christians or Iranians to practice their faith. But in reality, we have seen over the last several years in particular, but even throughout the 1990s, any Christian who is truly practicing their faith, and in particular wanting to share about Jesus, is persecuted very strongly.
How is Pastor Farshid's health?
Earlier this year, he was attacked in prison. His foot was broken, his toe was broken. He was denied medical attention, and It took a long time till he was in great pain, and after several requests, and finally he was given attention, and not adequate attention at that. Thankfully, his foot is better. Currently, we're not sure of his condition right now, but before his transfer, he was in decent condition. But again, it's up and down. And when they face health concerns, there's absolutely no guarantee that they'll get the medical treatment that they need.
And I'm sure that he is enduring tremendous persecution, but yet still continues to hold on to his faith in Jesus Christ, correct?
Farshid has written some beautiful letters from prison. They're available online that you can go and see. Beautiful letters which really describe his faith, his deep faith and his love for the Lord and his willingness to suffer even in the midst of this because of his love for the Lord.
David Yegnazar of Elam Ministries, tremendous stuff that you are doing on behalf of persecuted believers in Iran. David, as always, sir, a pleasure to have you on the broadcast.
Thank you very much. It's been great to be with you.
Up next, a job that requires long hours and hard labor, and the workers wouldn't have it any other way. See what it takes to put food on your table. Next. Young Americans today are growing up with high technology, computers, the internet, and so much more. But some of them are turning back to an old occupation, farming. And as Heather Sells reports, their methods could change the very foods we eat.
The U.S. needs to recruit new farmers, and fast. With an average age of 57, farmers are aging out, just as the world's food needs are growing.
By 2050, the population will be about 9 billion people.
One answer may lie here on Polyface Farm in Virginia. At midday, farmer Daniel Salatin gives his interns a lesson in haymaking. Throughout the afternoon, they'll take turns loading bales on the tractor and then into the barn.
It's hard work, but it's gratifying work, and you're exhausted by the end of the day, but you're just so happy to be with everybody and fellowship and work together.
Believe it or not, hundreds of young people apply every year for the opportunity to intern here at the Salatin Farm. Their reward, the ability to learn the latest in sustainable farming.
I think that pendulum is beginning to swing around now to where young people are beginning to realize, just sitting in a Dilbert cubicle working for the man in a Fortune 500 company doesn't do it for me. I want to touch what I've made.
Salatin attracts internship seekers from around the country and turns away hundreds each year. Many wannabe farmers have read at least one of his dozen books, respect his sustainable methods, and envy his $1 million operation. Tim Rohr fled his California desk job to learn from Salatin, who he calls the Steve Jobs of agriculture.
Being here, I don't know, there's been many days we've worked so far that haven't been less than 12 hours a day yet. I'm up and ready to go the next day, and it's just because there's a passion for doing it. I believe in it.
Part of that passion is driven by a desire to help fix our country's unhealthy eating problem. On Salatin's farm, interns learn the latest in regenerative farming techniques. No pesticides, no fertilizers, no hormones. Everything here is natural.
I really am very, concerned about health and nutrition and the way we grow foods and the way that affects us.
And for many of these interns, their walk with Christ is also a motivation.
Faith plays a big role for me. I see farming as my mission field. Come on, ladies.
Ben Beichler runs a dairy farm a few hours away. He credits his Polyface internship with jump-starting his farming career.
So much of what we do here on the farm is experiences, like knowing what you're looking for, knowing what to do if you get in a tight situation. And Polyface gave me real life experiences where, cows got out and things broke down.
Since his internship, Beichler has faced the same challenges that deter many of today's young farmers. The main obstacles, land and money.
I like to joke that farming is the American royalty. You either are born into or you marry it, or you have a really long struggle to get there.
So far, he's getting by managing a small herd that supplies his in-laws' creamery business. For others, like Jordan Green, working land that others have written off gives them a start. Green leases several properties in the Blue Ridge Mountains, overseeing everything from chickens to what's called forested pork. Think pigs feasting on grass, berries, and nuts.
I like doing something different every day and enjoying, working outdoors, working with animals.
The Department of Ag hopes to recruit more young farmers and ranchers like Green. It's spending $20 million a year to tout farming and help them get started.
But there's nothing more rewarding than working with the land, knowing that you grew something that other people can eat.
The real question, just where is the market for local organic food headed? Most industry watchers doubt it will become mainstream, but see it continuing to grow as a niche market.
I see sustainable farming becoming more and more plausible and viable.
What will also help the energy and dedication these young farmers bring to their work and ultimately to our tables.
I know it's what I'm supposed to do, so at the end of the day, it's going to happen.
I'm in farming for life. There's no question about that.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
Finally today, a movement of washing laundry for the down and out has grown from a local Southern California church to more than 100 locations across the country. The Laundry Love initiative helps people struggling financially by washing their clothes for free. It partners with local laundromats in cleaning the clothes of those living in shelters, motels, cars, garages, and on the streets. It all started when Greg Russinger asked a homeless man how the church could make his life better. The man's response was honest and practical.
He just kind of shared with us his life, and we just, in time, just asked him a simple question. What would it look like for us to come alongside you? And he thought about it, and his response to us was just a very simple statement, and yet in its simplicity, it really interrupted us. He just said, if I had clean clothes, I think people would treat me as a human being.
Well, experts say Laundry Love has grown because it's a simple way to give something necessary to people who don't have the means to do it themselves. And that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day and God bless.